Good morning, social media. I'll play the music and we'll let everybody in the room. Hey. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Veterans Breakfast Club. This is Greatest Generation Live on a special Tuesday morning, April 30th. Great to see you all this morning. As we had, those of you who joined us last night, you may have noticed at the beginning of the program, we had a little bit of technical difficulties last night. So this morning, Glenn is having a little bit of technical difficulties getting in. We are going to clear that up as soon as possible. As you know that I'm not supposed to be hosting this morning, but we're going to make do and we're going to juggle. So thank you all for being with us. We have Allen Packwood joining us. Allen, if you'd like to wave, say hi. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
It's great to have you. Thank you so much for being a part of the VBC here this morning. We're going to have a couple announcements here to start the program because I know that we only have you for an hour. So I want to get those out of the way as quick as possible so that we can dive straight into your story. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here real quick. And we just like to thank our sponsors. First, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health. They are dedicated to preventing and reducing tobacco use, educating people about tobacco hazards, and advocating for healthier places to live, work, and play. Find out everything there is to know about tobacco-free at their website, tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. And also, I'd like to thank UPMC for Life. They are a new sponsor to VBC this year, and they can help you make sense of Medicare, get the answers and information you need such as how to choose the Medicare Advantage plan that's right for you. UPMC for Life has plans by veterans, for veterans, and that could save you money and get you more benefits. You can view all their plan options by going to upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. And also, we have our new issue of the VBC magazine. This is a free magazine that you can get quarterly. If you don't receive it in the mail, it's because we don't have your address. So please send that to us and we'll be happy to get a magazine off to you in the mail. As well as we'll have a survey that comes up at the end of the program. We'd love to put that in the chat and love to hear people's feedback when it comes to time for that. We'll put that into the chat. So let me make sure that, let me see if Glenn here has entered. He's not on quite just yet, but that's okay. So we're going to jump over to Allen and your story, Allen, because it's an important one. But I wanted to jump in. How did you end up becoming the director there? And thank you again for joining us from the UK.
Yeah, so I'm joining you from a rather sort of wet and windy Cambridge in the UK. I'm based here at the Churchill Archives Centre, which is located on the campus of Churchill College, Cambridge, which some of you may have visited. And those of you who haven't, I hope you will have the opportunity, and I look forward to showing you around. Just a little bit about me to introduce myself. I think if a psychologist looked at my childhood, they would probably be able to predict where I was going to end up, because I was one of those children born in the late 1960s who grew up on Second World War movies, Second World War comics, had a huge toy soldier collection, and spent a lot of my time playing in the woods. So I had a love of history, which was instilled in me by my father and by his mother, particularly my grandmother. As a child, I loved visiting castles, stately homes, so I knew I wanted to do something with history. I went to Nottingham University and did a general history degree. But at the end of that, I was left thinking, well, where do I go next? How do I pursue a career in history? I came here to Cambridge and I started a master's degree in medieval history. But I quickly realized that my medieval Latin, my medieval French weren't going to be good enough. And so I had to think of an alternative. And I'd started volunteering in the archive room of Sidney Sussex College in Cambridge. And that opened my eyes to archives as a possible career. I got the professional qualification in archives, postgraduate qualification. I spent 3 years in Derbyshire working in local government. And then 28 and a half years ago, I was lucky enough to get a job here working on Churchill's papers. I was a young, naive, green archivist, and I was one of a team of 5 who were brought in to catalogue and exhibit the Churchill Archive. Now, don't need to tell anyone on this call that that is a huge collection. Churchill had this incredibly long political career, elected to the House of Commons in 1900 and not retiring from the House until 1964, served in many of the major offices of state and Prime Minister, of course, during the war and again in the 1950s. So this incredibly long career, and a career underpinned with military service, to answer Brad's question, which is popping up in the chat. Churchill was actually a soldier first and a politician second. He didn't do particularly well at school. He wasn't thought bright enough to go to university. We have some of his early school reports here in the Archive Centre, which make for hilarious writing, hilarious reading. There's one, for example, where the head teacher says, "Conduct has been exceedingly bad. He cannot be trusted to do any one thing." There's another where the headmaster says he lacks ambition. The truth, I think, as Churchill summarized it, was that where his reason, interest, or imagination were not engaged, he would not or he could not learn. In other words, he was stubborn, he was willful, he wasn't prepared to fall in with school ways. But he wasn't thought bright enough to go to university, and he was interested in the army. And so he goes into the army in 1895, and he spends his formative years between 1895 and 1899, between the ages of 20 and 24, serving as a cavalry officer in the Victorian Empire. His regiment, the 4th Hussars, are garrisoned in India, but he does everything he can to get himself out of garrison duty and to the front line. So he goes and fights on the Indian northwestern frontier in what is now Pakistan. He accompanies General Kitchener's expedition against the Mahdi in the Sudan. Yes, he is someone who is seeing military, who has that military service, and he never forgets that. I mean, he remains a territorial officer even when he becomes a politician. And of course, famously, when he falls from office over the Dardanelles crisis, which is something we might return to, his response is to return to the army, and he becomes briefly a lieutenant colonel commanding a battalion on the Western Front for the first few months of 1916. But to return to my original point, it was working on the Churchill Archive, cataloguing that archive, exhibiting that archive after it had been acquired for the nation, that brought me here to Churchill College. And I was then lucky enough, after a few years, to become the director of the Archive Centre. Sean, if I'm able to share the screen, I can show some images of the archives, if that would be appropriate.
Absolutely, Alan. Just made you co-host.
Okay, so I'm going to show you just quickly a few pictures, and we're going to start with this one. What you should be seeing on your screen now is a picture of Winston Churchill planting a tree. So Churchill College is the British National and Commonwealth Memorial to Winston Churchill, but unusually for a memorial, it was built during his lifetime. And at least with his nominal involvement, in that he chaired the trust which raised the money for the college. And he came here just once on the 17th of October 1959, before anything had been built, and he planted 2 trees, an oak tree, which you see him planting here, and a mulberry. He planted those trees, and he made what was one of his last public speeches, setting out his vision for the college that would bear his name. And interestingly, that vision was that the college should train more scientists, more technologists, more engineers. So here was Churchill, nearly 85 years old, at the end of this long life and career, still looking to the future and concerned that if Britain was to compete in the new Cold War, and of course the Russians had just put Sputnik up into space, then we needed to do that through our brains. We needed to do it by having more scientists. So he starts the college, and really from the very beginning, the college then starts to collect papers relating to Churchill's wartime government, the papers of people who worked for, with, and against him. But their hope is that Churchill's own papers will come and form the centerpiece of the collections here. While Churchill's alive, the material's with him and being used by him. When he dies in 1965, the collection all passes to his son, who starts writing the biography of his father and gets as far as volume 2 before dying himself in 1968. And at that point, Martin Gilbert takes over that biography from Randolph Churchill and ultimately takes it to completion. But it's also at that point that the question is asked, what is going to happen to this huge archive, the personal papers of Winston Churchill? What does the college do? We approach Clementine Churchill. She owns the post-1945 papers. She says she's going to give them to Churchill College. And on the back of that gift, the college crosses the Atlantic and engages with your countrymen and women and gets them to fund the original bricks and mortar, the original endowment for an archive centre. And you can see from the slide here that they're particularly targeting former American ambassadors to this country or their families and foundations. So we have an impressive list of American founding fathers for the Archive Centre: Annenberg, Mellon, Geffen, Rockefeller, Winant, and so on. So the simple truth is that we would not exist as an archive centre without American generosity. And that's something we remain incredibly grateful for. I think it's a model that these individuals understood because, of course, we're the closest thing in the UK to one of your great American presidential libraries, a library built to house the personal papers of Winston Churchill. And I like to joke, particularly with American groups, that we're now the equivalent of 4 American presidential libraries, because we also house the papers of Margaret Thatcher, of John Major, and we're just waiting for Gordon Brown's to come in. But that is really just the start of a much bigger endeavour. The Archive Centre has now almost 600 collections. The personal papers of prominent politicians, diplomats, military leaders, and scientists of the Churchill era and beyond. So the idea has been to gather around Churchill the papers of many of his contemporaries. And our mission is to preserve them in our purpose-built strong rooms, so they're here not just for this generation, but for generations to come. But it's also to make them as available as possible. So we're most famous for having the papers of Sir Winston Churchill, including 2 unsmoked Churchill cigars. But we also have Margaret Thatcher's papers, including 1 prime ministerial handbag. And then we have the papers, as I say, of this whole raft of other individuals. So you'll see there Rosalind Franklin, pioneering scientist on DNA. You've got Lisa Meitner, who was a pioneer of fission. Ernest Bevin, who was a Labour minister who served in Churchill's wartime government, and then afterwards was Foreign Secretary under Attlee at the beginning of the Cold War. Michael Young, a leading social scientist who founded all sorts of organisations over here, including the Open University. Neil Kinnock, the leader of the Labour opposition during Margaret Thatcher's years, so that we can juxtapose the Labour papers with the Conservative ones for that period. Admiral Ramsay, who went both ways across the Channel during the Second World War, in that he coordinated the Dunkirk evacuation, Operation Dynamo, but also the naval aspects of the D-Day landings, Operation Neptune. Field Marshal Lord Slim, who commanded British armies in Burma during the Second World War. Florence Horsburgh, first Conservative female cabinet minister in Churchill's peacetime administration in the 1950s. John Major, Prime Minister in the early 1990s. And over here, the gentleman you might not recognize, one of our more unusual collections, we have Vasily Mitrokhin, who was an archivist, but he was an archivist for the KGB and spent 12 years copying out KGB documents that named KGB operations in the West and KGB operatives in the West, and assembled this huge copy archive under his dacha outside Moscow. Then, after the fall of the Soviet Union, was able to make contact with our intelligence services, and we exfiltrated, which I think is a wonderful word, him, his family, and his archive, and brought them over to the UK, where the Cambridge academic Christopher Andrew worked with him on a couple of publications about the KGB and the way in which they operated. We were approached a few years ago and were told that it was Mitrokhin's wish that his personal papers should sit in a British university, and so we naturally agreed to take them.
Alan,
so
excuse me, will these from the chat, will these be digitized for the Churchill Archives?
So the Churchill papers, Churchill's own papers, which are 2,500 boxes and estimated 1 million items, they've already been digitized, working with the commercial publisher Bloomsbury. We make them freely available here. Bloomsbury sell them to other research libraries and institutions around the world. And I know that a number of American libraries have purchased them. Margaret Thatcher's papers have been digitized, and we've worked with the Margaret Thatcher Foundation, who've put many of them up on their website, which is freely available, and it's a resource I'd encourage you all to look at. Rosalind Franklin's papers have been digitized, working with the Wellcome Trust, and are available on their website. But we're now gradually working through our other collections, and as we go forward, more and more of this material will be made freely available on the Archive Centre's digital platform. But obviously it's a huge task to sort of work through those collections. But what we do offer is a free copying and research service. All of our catalogues are available online. So if one of you in the US were to look at our catalogues, say for Admiral Ramsey's papers, and decide that there were a couple of files that you were interested in, but you couldn't afford to come over to the UK, you could email the Archive Centre, give the file references, and we will copy those files and send them to you for free. And that's something we're very lucky to be able to do. In terms of our material, as you can imagine, the real strength of the Archive Centre is in the body of material that's been gathered in one place under one roof, so that you can look at Churchill, you can look at the Second World War, you can look at the Cold War from all of these different but complementary perspectives. But within that mass, of course, there are some really iconic documents. And this is just an example of a Churchill speech. It's actually a speech he gives to the University of Copenhagen in accepting an honorary degree after the war. But it shows how he worked. The way Churchill worked is that he would dictate. The speech would be set out, first of all, in normal typescript. He would go through making annotations, changes, alterations. Then when the speech is more or less in its final form, it's taken away, it's retyped at a size that will fit comfortably into his hand or his pocket. It's tagged together with these treasury tags. You can see the hole here so that he can't lose his place. But the thing that makes it distinctively Churchillian is that it's then set out on the page in this blank verse format, like poetry, which is something that's unique to Churchill. But you can see immediately why he does it, because it gives him the rhythm, it gives him the pauses, and it gives him the emphasis for his oratory. But even then, you've got his last minute handwritten annotations and additions. So I'll stop sharing there. That's really just to give you an idea about who I am, what the Archive Centre is, and what we do. But really, I want this session to be about sort of engaging with you and answering where I can your questions about Churchill.
Well, that was spot on, the exact amount of time we needed to get Glenn back on. So amazing.
Sean, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yep.
Thank you. Alan, this is Glenn Flickinger.
Hello, Glenn. Very good to see you. Very relieved to see you.
Well, I'm relieved to be in, and I apologize for my muck up. As you probably can tell, I'm on my iPhone rather than on my computer. No idea why the computer decided to melt down at about quarter till 10, at least relative to Zoom, it melted down. So
my experience is they always do. It's always the worst possible moment.
Yeah. Well, if you were familiar, as the audience is, with my dramatically high level of technical skills, you would understand why it melted down on me. It just doesn't like me, and I've figured that out over the years. So, Sean, thanks so very much for getting through this first half hour with Alan. And Alan, I was listening to some of it, and frankly, it went exactly as I would have hoped for the first part of this. So,
not a problem.
Okay. I'll jump in now because Alan, you've handled this exactly the way we would have liked to introduce yourself and introduce the Churchill Archives, which we're so very much looking forward to visiting. And by the way, I'm not sure, is Roxanne Hale on the phone call? Is she on the Zoom call? Can you tell?
I do see Roxanne, or at least I saw a Roxanne.
She's known as Sailor often on Zoom, or her email.
Yes, I asked her to unmute.
Okay. I just want to thank Roxanne. If you could wave your hand so we can acknowledge you. It's Roxanne who put us in touch with the Churchill Archives and Alan. And Roxanne, thank you so very much.
I can see Roxanne, at least her window, and she's unmuted. She may be having microphone issues, Roxanne.
Okay. Well, if she comes back on, we certainly want to acknowledge her for putting us in touch with Alan. So, Alan, I'm a big Churchill fan. I've read as many of the biographies as I can. I've read your book, How Churchill Waged War. I reread it actually a week or so ago in anticipation of this. And I understand you have another book coming out soon on Churchill. What is that one about?
Well, it's very kind of you to ask. It's always good for authors when people ask that question. So the book that I've got coming out is hopefully a very timely one. It's one that I've co-written with General Lord Dannatt, the former head of the British Army, and it's on Churchill's D-Day. It's being published in the United States by Diversion and in the UK by Hodder and Stoughton. But the whole idea of the book is that it looks at D-Day very much through the British perspective and through Churchill's perspective, and so seeks to explain why, from Churchill's viewpoint and that of the British Chiefs of Staff, you certainly couldn't consider any large-scale cross-channel operation in 1942, and why 1943 actually would have been incredibly risky. So why it was that 1944 was the right time to go, and Churchill's role in shaping the strategy, but also the preparations for D-Day. Yeah,
excellent. I really would look forward to that. And once it's out and I could get it read, we'd love to interview you about that book particularly. Okay.
Well, I can see if I can get Lord Dannatt to do something alongside with me, because I mean, I know that he would love to talk to a veterans organization.
Great. We would love to do that. We often do a lot, D-Day specific programs somewhere around June 6th. So might be. So let me develop a line of questioning that I'd hope to get into. First of all, have you happened to watch Apple TV's Masters of the Air series?
Now, unfortunately, I haven't been able to watch it because I'm not subscribed to the right channel to be able to watch it. But it's certainly on my it's something that's on my to-do list.
it has been, it's on the Apple TV in Britain, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's available. Do you know, do you have any feel for what the reaction has been in Britain about that show?
I think there's been a lot of interest in the show, and I think there is still an incredible amount of interest in the Second World War, and particularly in dramas that personalise the Second World War and look at the individual experience. So it has certainly been well received here.
It is, quite frankly, very American centric.
Yeah,
it's about the 100th Bomb Group, part of the 8th Air Force, and it does, I think, a fantastic job of illustrating what these men went through and the sacrifices they made, and getting in that airplane every day, knowing there was at least a 50-50 chance, if not better, of being a casualty is really kind of amazing.
You only have to be here in Cambridge to be aware of the huge contribution that the American 8th Army Air Force made during the Second World War. We're surrounded here by the air bases that they flew from. And of course, just up the road from here, literally 2 miles up the road, we have the American Cemetery at Madingley, which is a little piece of American soil. It is beautifully maintained. It is laid out like the cemetery at Arlington in Virginia, with the crosses and the stars of David in a semicircle around the American flag. You have a wonderful chapel that has stained glass windows representing the different states of the Union. You have a wall which records the names of the many missing, because of course for many of those airmen the remains were lost at sea or never recovered. And that is something that I always recommend. It's a place I always recommend visitors to go up and see. And of course, when your group visits the Archive Centre, if they wanted to, it is very close. We also, in the centre of Cambridge, have a famous pub called the Eagle, which actually has an Air Force bar within it, where on the ceiling, many of the airmen actually burnt their names with their lighters or matches into the ceiling. So that's also something that's worth seeing. So we are surrounded here in Cambridge with memories and echoes of that campaign.
So one of the points I make when I've been doing a lot of lectures, presentations at libraries and historical centers lately on the air war over Europe. And I emphasize the air war over Europe rather than just the 8th Air Force, because there's so much more to it than the 8th Air Force. And one of the points I make is that, to Americans is, hey, we didn't do this alone. By the way, the Brits had this thing called Bomber Command. I've read Max Hastings' book. We've had Max Hastings on the program a couple of years ago, not about that book, about one of his others. And I tell them, the Brits lost 50,000 men killed in action through Bomber Command over Europe in 1940, during the war, 40 to 45. And most of the time, people gasp at that. And I was hoping you could expand a bit from Winston Churchill's point of view on the development of Bomber Command's role through the war. Now, we've only got 20 minutes left, so we can't go too deep.
You could give a whole hour's lecture on this, but no, I'm really grateful to you for mentioning the role of the RAF, because of course that is a role that the RAF and Bomber Command are playing right from the beginning of the war. It's interesting that from the moment Churchill becomes Prime Minister on the 10th of May 1940, he inaugurates bombing raids against the enemy. It's something that his predecessor Chamberlain had been very reluctant to do, partly actually for fear of offending Roosevelt, who was very concerned about the bombing of civilian centres in Europe. But Churchill immediately launches bombing operations. But of course, at the beginning, in 1940, Britain is on the back foot. We're being directly targeted and attacked by the Luftwaffe. And although we are able to hit back, not in a particularly large scale, and it's quite clear that it's going to take time to build up those bomber forces. But to Churchill, this is a very important element in his war policy. He has become prime minister, and he has pledged himself very publicly to a policy of waging war until victory, however long and hard the road may be. But in 1940, he has very little means of taking the offensive to the enemy. We can launch small-scale commando raids against the French coast. We can encourage guerrilla operations behind the lines. We can fight the enemy in North Africa, where Britain does have an army and a navy, and where we are able to take on the Italians and do so with a lot of success initially in 1940. But to hit back against the main centres of German power, our abilities are very limited, and the bombing offensive is one of the main ways of doing that. So from the beginning, Churchill is an advocate for offensive air power against the enemy. It's just that you can't do much. Of course, once Germany has invaded the Soviet Union, and once you've had Pearl Harbor, then you can see the balance of power and the tide starting to shift. And you can see the US 8th Army Air Force arriving in the UK. And Roosevelt and Churchill meet at Casablanca in January 1943. And there, of course, they come up with the Casablanca Directive, which massively increases those air operations against Germany, with the British bombing by night and the Americans bombing by day.
I've always said, Alan, if I could just interject, we talked a lot about that Casablanca conference. We had an author on not too long ago who wrote the first definitive book that's only on the Casablanca conference. Yeah. And I can't remember his name right now. I have the book, but it's titled something like Casablanca Conference Will Bomb the Buggers Night and Day.
Yeah.
Which really appealed to Churchill's sense of politics, of war, of everything.
Yeah. But I mean, the key point about Casablanca is, what Roosevelt and Churchill are acknowledging at Casablanca is that to be successful, to be able to reinvade mainland Europe, what you're going to have to do is to greatly weaken your enemy. And one way of doing that is through the bombing. It's also a way of clearly demonstrating to Stalin that you are serious about taking the fight to the enemy, because Stalin is pushing and pushing for the opening of a second front in northwestern Europe. Churchill and Roosevelt, I think, for very sensible reasons, decide to go into North Africa first, and from North Africa it makes sense to secure the Mediterranean and to go into Italy and to knock Italy out of the war. But they need to be sending that signal to Stalin, and one way they can do that is through the bombing offensive and the use of air power. So it's about weakening the enemy while we build ourselves up. It's also about weakening enemy morale, but it's also about sending a clear signal to Stalin that we are doing what we can on that front. And of course, you see that bombing offensive build up and up from 1942. And I suppose if you're looking at Churchill, one of the interesting things is the question of whether and at what point he starts to have doubts about the use of that air power and the destruction that it's causing. After the raid on Hamburg, for example, he drafts a minute to the chiefs of staff, which starts, "Are we beasts? Are we taking," and effectively he's asking, "Are we taking this too far?" And the chiefs of staff force him to effectively take that minute back and to delete it. I think from the work that I've done on D-Day, what you see with Churchill, I think, is that he draws a clear distinction between the bombing of Germany and the bombing of occupied Europe. And certainly in the run-up to D-Day, in the months immediately before D-Day, you can see him getting extremely concerned about the risk of French civilian casualties, particularly because Eisenhower's bombing plan centers on hitting the French marshalling yards, the railway marshalling yards, which tend to be at the centers of French civilian population. And it's an issue he returns to again and again in the run-up to D-Day. He won't let it go. He raises it in the Defense Committee. He raises it in the cabinet. He raises it with Eisenhower. He raises it directly with Roosevelt. Is there some way that we can limit the civilian casualties? Wouldn't it be better just to hit German military targets rather than hitting these areas of French civilian population? But of course, for the military plan, Eisenhower and the chiefs of staff are adamant that this is the best way of proceeding. But I think what it shows you is Churchill worrying about Allied civilian losses, but also about the political effect of those Allied civilian losses. He's already starting to look to the future, and I think his fear is that if the French civilian population take huge losses, then they may be driven into the arms of the communists after the war. And that would also be true of other European countries. And I think you also start to see him wondering whether that is also true of Germany. Towards the end of the war, when he's starting to worry about where the Soviet Union is going to stop, where it's going to join these borders, his mindset is already thinking ahead and thinking, well, actually, who's going to have to pay to repair all of this destruction? And what effect is it going to have on the civilian population? And is it actually going to lead to a weakened Central Europe that would then be at the mercy of the Soviet Union?
Yeah, we forget now, 80 plus years after, how strong the Communist Party or elements of the Communist Party were in France. That there was a real possibility it could have turned communist at some point towards the end of the war. So, Alan, let me stop here. I could ask you 500 more questions, but let me see if there's someone in our audience. Sean, are there questions that anybody in the audience would like to ask Alan?
From earlier in the program, I know, Greg, you have your hand up. We'll get to you in just a sec. Susan asked, did Churchill know ahead of time about the Lusitania before the sinking by the U-boat?
That's a great question. I don't think there is any definitive proof of that. Certainly, if you email me separately on it, we'll get someone to look into it in any more detail. But my memory of this from when I've looked at it before is that he's certainly aware of the sort of sailing of the Lusitania and of the potential risk to the Lusitania. But I don't think that they're aware of the possibility of, they're aware that an attack is imminent. In some ways, I think it's probably similar to the conspiracy theories or the theories that you get about Pearl Harbor. Again, the question is, did Churchill and Roosevelt know that Pearl Harbor was going to happen ahead of time? Certainly, we have a letter from Roosevelt to Churchill, handwritten letter dated early October 1941, where Roosevelt talks specifically about the Japanese movements in the Pacific, and then says that I think in spite of this, we have 3 months of respite in the East. And of course, he's almost exactly right in predicting the date of Pearl Harbor. But that, again, doesn't mean that he knew the details. So did Churchill knew that there was a risk of the sinking of a ship like the Lusitania, and what the consequences of that might be? Yes. Did, the same thing, was he aware that the Japanese were becoming more and more aggressive and that there was more likely to be some sort of confrontation? Yes. But I think if he had any concrete information, either about the Lusitania or about Pearl Harbor, actually to repress that could have been counterproductive, because if it had then come out that he had known and that he hadn't released this information to the Americans, that actually would have played into the hands of those who would have been saying, well, Britain's not a reliable ally, we need to stay out of this conflict. So I think it's actually highly unlikely for that reason that he would have known.
Greg Yost?
Yes, thank you so much. Excellent talk. Like so many others, I could go on for hours with you, and I would love to sometime. We'll have to arrange that, right? So two quick questions. One is Churchill's knowledge of his own mortality during the war. And I'm going to go into this with FDR takes a lot of flack for not involving Truman in a lot of decisions when Truman's vice presidency, especially considering how sick FDR really was. So did Churchill leave enough of his knowledge with the cabinet, with the war people, so that if he had up and died in May 43, January 44, heart attack or bombing or something, that was that things were competent, that he felt personally competent that things were going to go in the direction he had hoped? My second quick question is, how much of these archives are still classified? In other words, are there things that can't be gotten into? Maybe I'll sneak a third question in here, like Rudolf Hess's mission, or any Germans' last Nazi attempts to negotiate with a British peace movement, and Churchill's political attempts to fight those two. So those are my questions. Thank you so much.
Second question first of all. So the point about the classified, 99.9% of Churchill's personal papers are open. There is a very small amount of material that it remains closed on Cabinet Office recommendations, but it's more things like his dealings with the royal family, and Ireland. Ireland remains, of course, a hugely sensitive subject over here. Of course, one of the differences between our system and your system in the US is that personal papers can be kept separately from official papers. So a lot of Churchill's official papers are at the National Archives in Kew. And there is certainly still material there that is also classified, and I think there probably still is material about the Hess mission that is still classified. I suspect when it's opened up, it will be found to be far less interesting than people think it is. But when Churchill left office in 1945, he took with him a lot of official material that survives in his personal archive. So his personal archive is actually very strong in terms of juxtaposing the personal and the official. So it is a very strong archive, and the vast majority of it is open. Of course, the other problem you have when talking about Churchill's archive is that it remained in his possession for a long time, and that he used it for writing his history of the Second World War and for other works. So, of course, if there was anything that was particularly, or that he felt was particularly embarrassing or compromising, there is always the possibility that it has been removed. But we're not aware, there aren't obvious removals in the archive. Churchill's own mortality sort of ties into that in a way, because the archive is very much his legacy, and he knew it would be his legacy, and he knew that it would be used to inform his own biography. But in terms of his own mortality, of course, in public, he was being portrayed as this bulldog warrior figure, resilient, defiant, very fit. He told, when General Montgomery said to Churchill, Prime Minister, I don't drink, I don't smoke, and I'm 100% fit. Churchill is supposed to have replied, General, I do smoke, I do drink, and I'm 200% fit. But of course, that wasn't the real story. And behind the scenes, actually, inevitably, with the strain of office, you can see that taking a huge impact on Churchill. There is some form of minor heart condition during his first visit to the White House in late 1941, early 1942, and he falls really seriously ill, of course, in North Africa after the Tehran conference at the end of 1943, where he tells his daughter Sarah, don't worry, if I die now, all of the plans have been laid, because he was aware that the plans had been made for D-Day. And I think, to answer your question, where he is different from Roosevelt, and part of that, of course, is the difference of the two political systems, is that, you know, during the war, he wasn't elected as prime minister. He's having to run a wartime national coalition government, which means that he is having to hold the various different parties together. He is having to report regularly to Parliament, and he does take care to do that, I think. Churchill, the politician, obviously often gets overshadowed by Churchill, the orator, I think. But, you know, during the war, he does make sure that key ministers like Eden and Attlee are informed and involved, that the war cabinet is aware of the big issues. When he goes overseas, either Eden or Attlee are nominated as his successors. Clement Attlee is his deputy prime minister and is running many of the things on the home front while Churchill is overseas. So I think he does put in place a structure that, if he had have been suddenly removed from the scene, someone else would have been able to step in. Now, that's true by the end of the war. The caveat I would make about that, of course, is 1940 itself, when Churchill becomes prime minister. Because when he becomes prime minister, you have a small war cabinet. He has to include Chamberlain as the leader of the Conservative Party. He has to include Halifax, who's been his main rival, and he's including the leading Labour ministers. And at that point, they haven't had the time to bed in and gel with one another. And of course, if Churchill had been taken out in the early months of 1940, the most likely successor would have been Lord Halifax rather than Eden or Attlee. And we know then, of course, that Halifax would have been likely to pursue a very different policy. He would have been likely to pursue, attempted negotiation with Germany if he could.
Alan Smith?
Yes, Alan, thank you. Did Churchill, after the war, feel in any way betrayed by the powers to be, that he wasn't the future leader for years to come? And just like Eisenhower, it would seem like a shoo-in. Eisenhower was president for the 8 years. It seems like Churchill, with all the accolades and that he was the next person, and then he wasn't. Did he ever feel betrayed in any way?
I don't know whether betrayed is quite the word. Certainly surprised and certainly extremely disappointed. I think there's no doubt that Churchill expected, on the back of his wartime administration, to be elected in 1945. Now, there are lots of reasons, I think, why that doesn't happen. And again, it's another subject that you could give an hour-long lecture on in itself. The first thing to say, of course, is that we have a different system in the UK. It's not a presidential system. So your prime minister, by virtue of being the leader of the largest party in the House of Commons, and by being able to command a majority in the House of Commons. So the question then becomes, why are people going to vote Labour rather than Conservative in 1945? And I think there are lots of reasons for that. One is, I think, that there are people who still see the Conservatives as the party that had been responsible for getting them into this mess in the first place under Chamberlain, prior to the beginning of the war. There's also, I think, a widespread belief that Clement Attlee's Labour Party is more likely to embrace a radical program of reform in terms of education, healthcare, rebuilding of housing, bringing back the troops from overseas. And after 5 years of war and hardship, it's not difficult to see why that was attractive to large sections of the British population. The related factors concerns Churchill is the way he then handles that election, because of course he had the option, I think, to not compete at all. He could have said, I've led you through the war, I'm stepping down now, and he would have gone out, sort of triumphant. He didn't want to do that. He didn't see himself as finished. He wanted to play a role in shaping the peace. And he said very clearly, I don't want to be put on a pedestal. The problem is that what he then does is to embark in very sort of partisan party politics, rather than remaining above the fray and presenting himself during the 1945 election as the sort of safe pair of hands and asking to be allowed to finish the job. He launches into a very vitriolic campaign against the Labour Party, culminating in one famous radio broadcast where he actually says that if the Labour Party are elected, they will have no option but to introduce some form of Gestapo into the UK. Now, those were very hardline words, and they were very ill-judged. They were very poorly received. And I think in some ways they're reflective of Churchill's exhaustion by this point, but also of the fact that he found it difficult to separate the rhetoric that he was using against the communists in Greece, against the Stalin in Poland, from the rhetoric that he's starting to use on the home front. Because, of course, Attlee and the Labour government, I mean, this included people who had been serving alongside him in his own cabinet only weeks before. So he did not conduct, I don't think, a particularly effective election campaign. I think he was far more preoccupied with Potsdam. I also think that he felt that there would be a vote of gratitude for him. When his doctor, Lord Moran, put it to him that there were two concerns during the campaign. One was an interest in a brave new world, and the other was a sense of gratitude to him. Churchill replied that the sense of gratitude to him was far more important, but he got it completely the wrong way around. So I think it's all of those factors coming together that lead to the defeat. And there's no doubt that he is disappointed by it. And for a while, it sort of knocks him back, I think. And it takes until the delivery of the Fulton speech in March 1946 for Churchill really to recover and to re-emerge on the world stage. But of course, he doesn't come back. And actually, of course, he does come back. And like Eisenhower, he is president in the early 1950s when Eisenhower is, sorry, he's prime minister in the early 1950s when Eisenhower is president.
Yeah. Sean, are there others? I have one other I'd like to ask, but I don't want to step on other. Probably have time for a couple more questions.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Glenn.
So I've always been intrigued, Alan, with Churchill's relationship with FDR, which changes dramatically over the course of the war, right? As I can't remember the exact Churchill quote, there's so many of them, that he was wooing FDR.
No lover ever studied every whim of his mistress as I did those of President Roosevelt.
You should write a book on all the quotes. Yeah, there's so many of them, and they're all also entertaining. But that relationship changes during the course of the war, and it obviously changes because as the U.S. builds up its forces and the Soviet Union exerts its incredible military power, which we tend to discount a bit when we talk about the war, right? We need to remember that 85% of the German casualties occurred on the Eastern Front.
Yeah.
So anyway, it changes dramatically, and famously Churchill does not attend FDR's funeral.
Yeah.
So could you comment on how that changed over time and what it looked like at the end of the war?
Well, I think you've just very well described the main phases of that relationship. I mean, at the beginning of the war, Churchill is very much in the position of wooing Roosevelt. One of the things that Churchill is clear on from very early on is that ultimate victory, as opposed to just survival, depends on the United States and the involvement of the United States. And so it is a clear plank of his policy, a clear plank of his premiership to try and get greater American involvement. And he spends an inordinate amount of time courting Roosevelt publicly and privately, publicly through those great speeches for the summer of 1940, which all contain within them an appeal to the United States, and privately by entertaining Roosevelt's emissaries, Hopkins, Harriman, Winant, and so on, and doing everything he can to get to the president. That's phase one. Then, of course, they meet at the Atlantic meeting in August 1941, so still before Pearl Harbor. And it's quite clear that on a personal level, that they do get on. And this is in spite of the fact that when they first meet in Newfoundland, it's actually not their first meeting. Churchill thinks it's their first meeting, but they have met once at the end of the First World War at a meeting that Churchill has forgotten, where Roosevelt thought that Churchill had been rude to him. So things could have got off on quite a sticky start. But actually, in terms of their personalities, they're both people who have a huge interest in huge range of subjects, and they share a sort of passion for history, for politics, for looking at the world, and they're two men who, of course, don't have that many other people at that level that they can talk to, I think. So I think there is a personal rapport to that relationship at that stage. And initially, of course, they're sharing very much the same war aims. Both Churchill and Roosevelt are agreed that victory is dependent on the Anglo-American allies coming into the European theatre as soon as possible. They're then agreed that the best way to do that is to go into North Africa while building up forces for the assault on France. And of course, in that, Roosevelt overrules Marshall, who would have preferred to build up the forces in Britain, not go into North Africa and just go straight into France. So initially, they're sharing a very clear vision for the war. And I think the high point of that is the Casablanca conference that you mentioned earlier, which is like the meeting of two emperors. I think Macmillan describes it as being like the meeting of the Roman emperor with the Byzantine emperor in the past, and where they sort of hold court and they determine a sort of an immediate strategy for taking the war forward. I think that's the high point of their relationship. But then you're right, the more that the US forces and materials come into the conflict, the larger the role that they're playing, the less of a role there is for Churchill, the more the decisions are being taken by the combined chiefs of staff in Washington, D.C. But then I think it also relates to their visions for the post-war world, which are very different. Churchill's vision is a return to the world of 1939. It's the restoration of the British Empire. After all, he said in November 1942, "I have not become the King's first minister to preside over the liquidation of the British Empire." Although, ironically, with hindsight, you can argue that he had. But that's not how he saw it. He wanted the restoration of empire. That's not Roosevelt's vision for the post-war world. Roosevelt's vision is the new United Nations organization, which he's championing to guarantee peace. And a key part of that, of the success of the United Nations organization for Roosevelt, is coming to some form of accommodation with Stalin and making sure that Stalin is included within that UN organization. For the Americans, of course, there is also, the clear desire to involve the Russians in the Pacific theater as well. So you've got these conflicting visions, which in the way in which they start to approach Stalin, in the way in which they start to approach the position in Europe, you see them moving apart politically. So although personally, they remain on cordial terms, it's politics, and it's their role as leaders of their respective countries that is pulling them apart. And when it comes to Roosevelt's funeral, I think it's politics that dictate that Churchill doesn't go there. The official reason I think that's given is that he can't leave the country at that time because his foreign secretary and his deputy prime minister are out of the country. That had never stopped him in the past. It's possible, of course, that his health was not good at that point, and I'm sure that Clementine and his doctors would have been advising him against yet another Atlantic crossing. But I think the real reason he doesn't go is that if he goes, he knows he has to meet the new president, Truman, for the first time on American soil. And I think he senses a political opportunity that if he doesn't go, then maybe Truman will have to come to him, and Truman will have to come to the UK. And of course, Churchill has been trying to get Roosevelt to the UK throughout the war. If that was Churchill's calculation, of course, it backfires because Truman doesn't come, and the first time they meet's at the Potsdam Conference.
Right. There's a rather poignant picture, a photo of Churchill visiting FDR's grave sometime after the war. I can't remember exactly when, but the expression on his face is almost like all of us would have about saying goodbye to an old friend, on a personal level.
Yeah, and I don't doubt there was that feeling on a personal level. And Churchill often wore his emotions on his sleeve. So he's someone who actually would cry in public. He cried in the House of Commons after announcing the news of the sinking of the French fleet, for example.
Yeah. Well, I see it's 11:02 here on this side of the ocean. I want to respect our time that we had agreed with you with 1 hour. And Allen, it's been an absolute delight to have you on. We're very much looking forward to our stop at the Churchill Archives in September with our travel group, and really hope that you're able to make it. We're able to meet you in person. Finally, we'd love to have you on again, maybe in a few months' time, with respect to the new book, Churchill and D-Day. So thank you very much, Allen.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's beyond the call of duty to ask me to come back, but it will be an absolute pleasure to do it. And thank you all very much for listening today. And for those of you who are veterans and listening, thank you all very much for your service.
Well, thank you. And I think almost everybody in our audience would say the same thing that I'm about to say. We'd love to have your job. So watch out.
Okay, well, I'll be careful when you're over here in September. In case.
Get to spend all day, every day with Winston Churchill. What else what could be more fun? Okay, Allen, we'll let you go, but we're going to ask the audience to stay on for the second part of our Zoom event this morning. Thank you, Allen.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your patience at the beginning of the program. We'll hope to see you soon. No problem.
Okay, bye.
Okay.
I'm gonna butt in, Glenn, just to invite Sean. I'm back. I'm just got off the road back from Bucks County where we had an event yesterday morning. Sean, I want to invite you to leave. Get out of here. You got things to do. You've got a daughter in your lap. But however, why don't you remain host? Why don't you? And sorry once again to expose how this operation takes place in the background. I recommend, Sean, since you're host, why don't you turn off your video, turn off your microphone, and then leave, and that will keep our restream going.
Yeah, excellent. We can definitely do that.
Very good. I know, because you have work to do.
And let me thank Sean for subbing in at the last second with such great aplomb and great work.
SAT word, aplomb. Excellent. Like that word.
Not a problem. Happy to do it. And the album was great. So, it's always nice to have a guest on who you just trust, and they're going to, you open up his mind, and it's book of knowledge. So thank you, Glenn.
Okay. So Todd, I'm on my iPhone, as you might have guessed by now. So I don't have any, I'm not quite sure how many people that we still have on. I see 32 people still on.
Yeah, and this is just an information session about our trip coming up, our Masters of the Air tour of World War II English airfields. And the trip is from September 11th to September 19th. It's 8 days, 7 nights in Britain. The first night will be over the Atlantic Ocean, flying out. I could share the link to the page of the trip and also to a detailed itinerary. But what I thought we would do is simply discuss the itinerary and entertain any questions you might have. So first thing to let people know is, and I just put the detailed itinerary here in the chat, is that we originally had advertised the trip as having group air round trip from Newark. And we got such blowback about that. And I didn't realize how miserable Newark was. I mean, I had been there. I think the last time I'd been at Newark, I think it's called Liberty Airport, International Airport, was maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And it certainly wasn't good, but I had figured it had to be better. And I think John Kramer said that he had such a bad experience, specifically flying overseas out of Newark, that he wouldn't do it again. And then several other people said they'd really prefer not to fly out of Newark. So we ended up canceling that group air. And instead, what we did is, everybody will get there on their own. But I did find a good flight, nonstop, direct from Pittsburgh on British Airways for not a bad price. And so we've signed up, I think it's now 14 or 16 of us are flying direct nonstop round trip from Pittsburgh to London Heathrow on September 11th in the evening, and then returning home in the evening on September 19th. So I could put the details of that itinerary also here in the chat. And if people would be willing and able to fly out of Pittsburgh with us, would welcome that, because it's a lot of fun to, meet at the airport and get the trip going together. So I will be on that trip. Glenn, you'll be arriving in England earlier, correct?
Yeah, I'm going to go about 4 or 5 days earlier, and I'm going to. I've already made my hotel arrangements for the first part before we meet up. I'm actually going to spend 4 days in Canterbury, England. I'm enthralled with Canterbury Cathedral and the history there, and I'm actually going to go visit the battlefield of the other Norman invasion, the one that occurred almost 1,000 years ago in 1066. So sort of satisfies some of my other historical curiosity. And then I'll meet up with you on the Thursday, right? And the Thursday, the first day that we're there is and I perhaps the other thought I would express as we go through this day by day is speak up if you have a question about what we're doing that day. Okay, so we can better plan, better understand your thoughts. But the first day we arrive at you guys arrive at Heathrow, and we travel by motor coach to Uxbridge, stop for breakfast along the way, and we spend most of the day at the Uxbridge bunker, okay, with an on-site tour. So the Uxbridge bunker is the RAF bunker from where the Battle of Britain was managed and controlled by the RAF senior command. I found a delightful book on this. That's a recent book, and I'm trying to put together a reading list, which will get out soon, by a Brit who lives nearby, and he does tours of that bunker. If you've seen some of the Churchill programs or some of the Battle of Britain programs, it's where, it's deep underground, and it's actually quite a few steps to get down there, and there's no elevator, no lift, as they would say. It's where they would move around the models of the airplanes as the Germans were coming in, and the British brand new radar system and their outlooks along the coast were calling in where the German planes were coming in, and then which RAF bases were responding, so forth and so on. So I think I will find it fascinating. But that's our morning. And then the afternoon, right nearby, is the Royal Air Force Museum. So we'll the first day we'll be focusing on basically the Royal Air Force and the Battle of Britain.
And I'm sharing the detailed itinerary that's on our website. I put it in the chat. I also put that British Airways nonstop from Pittsburgh information in the chat if people want to check that out. So we're here sharing the screen with the first day, the first full day in England, and that's Thursday, September 12th. We'll be staying overnight in Milton Keynes at a hotel there. Breakfast and dinner will be included, but not lunch on that first day, which is would breakfast wouldn't be included. We arrive at, yeah, you know what? That's an error.
We stop for breakfast along the way is what I have.
Oh, do we?
Yep.
Oh yeah, right here. Stop for breakfast along the way. Okay, you're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And I've got a version of this, Todd, which I'll send to you, and I'll send it along to everybody else. I got from Laura, that I think is a little better description. That one there. It's a little more detailed, a little more background knowledge.
It may have been updated since I posted this on our website.
Yeah. So that's day one. Anybody want to ask a question or make a comment about day one?
And I should just invite people. Yeah, feel free to wave your hand, ask a question. Oh, and I should let everybody unmute themselves here in this meeting, which I will do. So you could just butt in and ask a question. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to ask all to unmute if you want. And I'll allow everybody to unmute themselves. Okay, that's done. Yeah, so feel free just to unmute, ask a question, make a comment. So the next day, Glenn, is Bletchley Park?
Bletchley Park is the next day. The first night we stay overnight someplace called Milton Keynes. And then the second day we travel by bus to Bletchley Park, which is not very far away. And of course, we spend the day there. And of course, Bletchley Park is the center for the English code breaking effort, Enigma, and so forth. It's a old, the building itself is an old Tudor looking building. It's a mansion, some, English lord somewhere a few hundred years ago built. But then as they expanded the number of people that work there, they kept occupying other buildings and building temporary buildings. But it is the center for the code breaking of Enigma. Here's a thought I've had too. I've been doing a little bit of research. I'm not finished on it, and there's a lot of books on Bletchley Park and the code breaking process. I'm going to try to come down to one or two recommendations.
Good.
There's also some great. There's one great movie about this, and that's the one with what's his name?
Cumberbatch.
Yeah, Cumberbatch. Yeah, I think it's called Enigma.
No, Imitation Game.
Sorry, thank you. So one thought I've had, Todd, is to not only come up with a reading list, but to come up with a movie list.
Yeah, agreed. Right.
You could also, I've done a little bit of this where I've researched on YouTube. In fact, that's how I found the author of the book on Uxbridge Bunker is on YouTube. So, and there's some great documentaries on Bletchley Park on YouTube. So those of you who don't want to read, a dozen 300-page books.
No, Glenn, I agree. Yeah, I completely agree. Because, the book list that you could send would be enormous, more than you could finish, more than most people could finish, except you, and by September. So I think a good idea would be to share a book list, a really select book list, and then a lot of YouTube links of lectures and programs and documentaries that could be watched, and then, like you say, movies. Yeah. And so we'll get on that.
Any comment on that from our audience?
No comments.
Very quiet audience here, Todd.
That's good. We like quiet.
You sure it's not just you and me talking to each other?
Yeah. No, and we don't like quiet, actually. But that's okay. And people will speak up. We have afternoon tea. What if we don't like tea? Can we have coffee?
I bet you they got coffee.
They better.
They serve more than tea with it.
Okay, they serve. So afternoon, what they call afternoon tea is something different from like a cup of tea. Ben.
Correct.
Well, it approaches supper.
Okay.
There's also stuff to eat with it.
There's stuff to eat. Carol, is that true?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. All right.
Lots of little delicious tiny finger sandwiches.
Yes, that's what we'll have. Watercress. I'm picturing a watercress sandwich.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is watercress?
Oh, it's an interesting little plant, and it has a flavor somewhat like a radish.
I like radishes. Okay. All right. I changed my mind about afternoon tea. I'm now for it. And then we drive to Cambridge.
Right.
The old university town. And and then afternoon tea. And then we go to Cambridge really because Cambridge is our base of operations for Duxford. And there's a lot of stuff around Duxford.
Right. It's Duxford is the home of the Imperial War Museum Battle of Britain Air Show, which they're putting on for the first time since before the pandemic. So probably since 2019. And everything we hear from our travel people is it's in huge demand.
Yeah. Off the charts. Off the charts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Off the charts demand. And it may, in fact, require a bit of shuffling of the schedule. In other words, I think we've put in this itinerary that our Gold Pass day will be Saturday, and then Sunday would be an optional general admission day. That may be flipped. That may be shuffled around. We're not quite sure. And it just seems like the air show people are really in... They're scrambling to catch up with the demand for this weekend.
Yeah. So we're waiting to hear from our travel agent, who herself is waiting to hear from the travel agency in Europe, who is waiting to hear from the Battle of Britain people. So we're not 100%. I mean, we will be there for 2 days, right? It's just really the only question is, I think, which day we're going to have Gold Pass tickets for.
Correct. And this is a very active 2 days, this Saturday and Sunday, Glenn. We have a lot planned. We have a lot we want to pack in those 2 days. The air show, obviously, I think everybody will want to go to that at least to for sometime, one day or maybe both days. We have Allen Packwood, who we've just had on, going to give a presentation at the Churchill Archives. We have the whole city of Cambridge, which is a beautiful medieval university city to explore. And then we have the wonderful plan to reunite Ed Cottrell with his 48th Fighter Group, which is nearby. So there's a lot we want to accomplish that weekend. Jim and Linda, hello.
Hello. Just can you tell me what exactly does having a gold pass mean?
Glenn, I'll throw that to you.
I'll make up an answer.
No, exactly.
No, I actually asked Laura, our travel agents, back in January, that very question, Jim, because I was, had the same question. And actually I asked, why don't we have it on both days? And the answer is it's a VIP pass. So you get better seating, you get a better view. You get, it's sort of like having a high level ticket to a golf tournament. You get the nicer accommodations, you get the air conditioned tent, you get the nicer snack food and access to the drinks. So right now, that's all I can explain. But it's much sought after. We know that from what we're hearing from Laura about our ability to get those, right? We're going to get them. It's just a question of which day. So, and I asked Laura, why not both days? Of course, there's a cost element involved, but the answer, she said, is that, and she's been there several times to the Battle of Britain Air Show, is that if we're going to spend 2 days in Cambridge, if you spend 1 day at the air show, you may feel that's enough. And then the second day, you might want to go visit the various sites there are in Cambridge, of which there's many. We could, personally, I could spend a week in Cambridge myself with the museums, the archives, et cetera, et cetera. The other is
War
that
Museum is awesome.
Which museum?
The Imperial War Museum is awesome. I was there in 1982.
Right. Now that's not the one in London. We're referring to the one in Duxford, which is near Cambridge.
Okay.
Yeah. There's an Imperial War Museum in London as well. This is a offshoot of it, if you will. It emphasizes the air part more so.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So her thought was give people a open date where they could go to the air show with the general pass if they like, or you can go visit other things in Cambridge. And we had a few inquiries. I'm not sure that anybody signed up that's going to do this. I know people were thinking about it. Is that there are other American air bases nearby, World War II air bases nearby. They're all within an hour or so of Cambridge. And we're only going to 2 of them on the Monday, but somebody's father was with the 303rd or the whatever other bomber group, and they want to just take a half a day, rent their own car, get their own travel arrangements, and go visit that base. So hopefully that answers the question, Jim.
Well, here is the list. I looked it up on the website here. The Gold Experience tickets, which are sold out, we have ours secured, include unbeatable views of the flight line, entry to the exclusive Gold Marquee, providing indoor and outdoor seating. And I imagine that's very important if there's going to be rain or very hot weather. A complimentary Duxford Air Show program, talks relevant to the theme of the air show, pilot meet and greet, subject to pilot availability, and visitors with a disability can bring one personal assistant free of charge. That sounds like a loophole. Okay. Very good.
Okay, so
Chad.
is that...
Hey,
Pardon?
Chad.
Yeah.
Hi, Todd. I'm looking at this is going back 2 pages on here. The arrival in Terminal 5. Is that definite?
Yeah, subject to British Airways, yes.
The reason I'm asking, I'm going to be going early as well. And then I'm going to be coming back later. That's why I did this arrangement. I just want to make sure I know where to find you guys.
Yeah, and you'll have to get to us, I would say, Chad, at Terminal 5, or meet outside Heathrow.
I have the same point, Chad, and several others do that are going early. And I think what we'll do is the week or so before the trip, we'll determine for sure what gate the plane is coming into, what terminal we'll meet at, and then we'll share that information and say, as far as we know, everybody's to meet at X spot at 9:30 a.m. that morning.
Yeah, I know
the other thing I imagine
to be an arrival area somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. We'll give you the arrival area as specific as it can be. But the other thing we can do is, obviously, I think we all ought to have each other's cell phone numbers so that any last minute changes, we can just talk via cell phone and get everybody there to the right spot.
I'll make sure you and Todd have it.
Yeah, we'll get a list, and I think we should exchange it with everybody, Todd.
Yeah.
You think?
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, you got to make sure, Greg Yost just posted this, and it's my experience as well. Make sure you get a cell phone plan for being in Europe for that week. I did that in my recent trip to Italy, and it was $100 extra to give you, all the cell phone coverage and text coverage and all that you would want.
We have Nancy Putnam with us. She is very involved with the 100th Bomb Group.
Oh, Nancy.
Legacy, and a real expert. Nancy, thank you. I'm sure you have information to share with us.
Well, I have a question. question. First of all, this is wonderful. I wish I could join you all. Who in the group has been to the Duxford location, to all the museums and everything there? Have any of you? There's an American. Okay, it is massive. And I'm looking at the list that you are planning for that day. None of it is museum time, and I can tell you that. Even just the American Air Museum, but there's a whole Battle of Britain museum there.
Yep.
There's the American Air Museum, and they are a mile apart. And then in between are smaller buildings. Every single one of them has a theme having to do with the air war. You can spend a week just at the museum. And yeah, all the air shows are amazing. So I have been to the July one, not to the September one, but I would just suggest that as you look at that for options, that consider at least a few hours at museums. Most groups spend a day at Duxford at the museums, aside from any air show. So just a suggestion.
And I've heard that not in quite that detail, Nancy, from other sources. I was talking to somebody who's been there, and I said, "Yeah, I think I'll just go one day, and the other day I'll spend in Cambridge." And he said, "Well, you need to go both days because the museum. It's not just the air show; it's all these other museums you just referenced."
Yeah, it's all. Once you're in there, it's all there. But I mean, it's massive. And I can only imagine that they'll all be open and fully staffed, but you're obviously going to be focused on the air show. So just a suggestion, and I know you're probably doing Mattingly the next day, the Cambridge, and the American Cemetery at Cambridge, which is we all refer to it as Mattingly, but yeah.
There is a visit to the American Cemetery
Yep.
scheduled that weekend as well.
Yeah, that's well worth it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Nancy. That's very valuable. Nothing like talking to someone who's been there, done that.
Yeah, and I've run tours there, so I can tell you I've chased back and forth between the buildings, and so you definitely want to have that in mind. And if you're going to do it in an organized way and provide transportation, it's got to be clearly defined. Otherwise, you will never find people. It's well worth it. It's really good.
Excellent. Todd,
what are some of the museums, Nancy, in Duxford?
It's if you can look it up online, each building, some are restoration buildings that you can go into and watch them doing their work. I have not been into Duxford for 7 years, and they may have changed some, but each one has different themes. So the two anchor museums, on one end is the American Air Museum. That's amazing. When I was there in 2012, maybe, I was with, or 2014, I was with a ground crew chief, 100th Bomb Group guy, and his son. They were reassembling the Mary Alice, which is their B-17. And the guys, the 30-something engineers, technicians were standing there trying to figure out how to reattach a wing. And this 90-something-year-old ground crew chief walked up and, had the entire place riveted, giving them a lesson on how you reattach a wing to a B-17. And so you'll see restorations, you see planes, and it spans the whole up, pretty much up through the Cold War. The Battle of Britain is one whole end. That's also amazing. And you can spend a day just in that building. So,
and they're not all affiliated with the Imperial War Museum.
No, this is all the Imperial War Museum.
Okay, yes, that's what I thought. Okay, got it.
If you
then
look
I do
online,
know. Okay.
The Imperial War Museum at Duxford.
Yep.
You can see the current list, and I wouldn't want to speak to that because they're always changing it and updating it.
That's what I've been looking at, and I just thought if there were other museums. Yeah, no, I do. I will share this a link to the various Imperial War Museum
and
museums.
then people can target what they're interested in. But if you're going to have transportation for the group as opposed to doing it individually. I don't know how that'll work out, but so.
Okay. I'm going to put a link to a map here
Yeah.
so that people can see. I see 7 museums.
Yeah, it's definitely, yeah, for museum people, I mean, it's like it's Mecca.
Here, I'll share my screen so people can see these options here. Yeah, if you're a museum person, 1 airspace, 2 flying aircraft, 3, well, then there's historic Duxford, 3 air and sea, 4 Battle of Britain, conservation in action, 1940 operations room. That sounds pretty cool. American Air Museum, then the Land Warfare Museum.
Yes, I was going to say land warfare. I remember operations. I definitely remember. Yeah, it's really, I mean, for people interested in the air war, it is amazing. And it is to the gentleman, to Allen's speaking last hour, it is equal time for it's an allied museum. You know, Brits, Americans, you get it all.
Right.
Excellent. Great preparation for us, Nancy. Thank you.
You'll enjoy it.
So should we move on to day 5 here, Todd? Which
yes. We have item A. Hey, item A.
Hi, pretend I'm Dale.
Hi, Dale. How are you?
I'm doing great, Todd. How about you?
If you're Dale, I'm going to, say some sharp words, and I can't do that to you, item A. So
instead of the cell phone plan, how about that WhatsApp that you used in Vietnam? Because that's no charge.
Yeah, WhatsApp is great. That's what we before when we get our travel group set, I will recommend that everybody download WhatsApp, and we'll create a WhatsApp group. And that's a really great way to get messages to each other. The other thing that I will recommend is Photo Circle. I think that's what it's called. Photo Circle. Yeah, Photo Circle. It's another app. Wonderful way to share photographs. We did that in our last trip to Vietnam, and really powerful tool for sharing photos.
That's the voice of experience from Todd. He's been there, done this. I like the WhatsApp idea, Todd. That's great.
Yeah.
So let's move on then. Actually, day 6 now. So Saturday and Sunday, let's just say at the air show, Cambridge, all of the specifics to be defined a bit here as we move forward. Day 6 then is Monday, and that's the day we go visit the 2 bomber bases. Featured with Thorpe Abbott's, which Nancy Putman has been instrumental in putting us in touch directly with the people there and arranging our visit. We'll arrive there, I think it's at 10 a.m., and we'll be there at least 3 hours. It'll include lunch there to be decided whether it's hot or cold yet, Todd, but we'll decide that. I'm sure Nancy and many others that it'll be a fantastic experience there.
Yeah, that was a kind of a funny option that the museum themselves, right, asked us, we can serve you lunch. Would you like it hot or cold?
Yes.
Nancy, do you have a recommendation? Nancy, could you unmute yourself?
I will. Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, easy to explain. They have different local vendors that they use, and we've done the hot options the times we've gone there, but they can do sandwiches, they can do anything. Just say send me the menu options, and then you'll know. That's how I would do it. So I know that yeah, it's a really matter of what you prefer. Be aware that their food can be heavy by our comparison, and so that might influence your decision. Watch out for the mushy peas. Oh, they're disgusting. It's like, and that's something that they all seem to offer. It was like gross. Anyway, I would avoid that personally.
Baby food is what it is.
But yeah, so the 95th doesn't do anything like that. So when I saw your schedule, that's when I said, be sure to take advantage of that offer, which they can arrange for ahead of time. You'll know the prices And they'll just bring the vendor on site. They've been doing that because they've got so many groups coming through.
Yeah.
So you'll love it. It's great. It's great. And 95th and the 100th, their museums are both excellent and totally different.
Totally different.
Totally different. The facilities are different. So there is no control tower left at the 95th, but they have a very well preserved, what they call their Red Feather Club. And off of that, they have taken a room, and that is their museum. It is one room, but it is outstanding. I love their museum. It is not open very often. They are only open typically 1 or 2 days a month. So, but also they've stepped up because of Masters of the Air. So I obviously I'm not involved with you in that. I hope those arrangements are solid because we have had trouble with that in the past.
Right.
When we've taken groups. So just have Laura double check that. But no, and they have what is originally what almost looks like a dance hall to you and me in olden day terms, but it's great. It's their bar, their museum. It's whereas the Thorpe Abbott's is their control tower museum, which is a couple of stories, and the restored glass house on the top, which overlooks the whole base. Then you have the machine sheds. You have other exhibits in buildings right there nearby. And the difference between those two, just as an FYI, every one of these bases was built off a lease with the local landowner when the war hit. The agreement in every one of them was to revert to farmland. And in most cases, 100% reverted to farmland. And the landowner had the right to refuse any further. They could just tear down every building, tear up every runway. The 100th Bomb Group is fortunate to have a wonderful relationship with Sir Rupert Mann, good friend to all of us, second or third generation since the war, and he maintains a 999-year lease for the museum. And that is how they operate. And it's like kind of the equivalent, I believe, of like $1 a year. And, that's in terms of how Americans think of it. And he is phenomenal. He does give special permission when groups come in. So if you have any special requests, make them ahead of time because they will need permission if they're going to go out onto the base.
And Nancy, these bomb group museums, I picture them as being very different from, say, the Imperial War Museum.
Oh yeah,
layouts. Yeah. I mean, totally. My understanding is that this is like the Imperial War Museum is like the Smithsonian, very polished, national, well-funded.
Yes.
These are mostly if not all volunteer effort.
It is 100% volunteer. And so when I've taken groups over, obviously we're 100th Bomb Group. We go to the 100th to 95th and the 390th, which was the 13th Combat Wing. We flew all our missions together. So my dad, as a pilot, was leading the 13th Combat Wing the day he was shot down. Each one of these bases has a truly unique museum, strictly volunteer built and managed and run to this day, all volunteer. And that's why you run into some of the glitches you guys ran into trying to set up arrangements. Yeah. There is no, there's no paid.
There's no staff. Yeah, there's no staff. No. But what there are people who know the history, who love the history. You have this who have an intimate connection with the history. And then you have wonderful one-of-a-kind artifacts. And that's... Yeah,
exactly. So obviously the 100th focuses on the 100th. Horham focuses on the 95th. You're not going to Parham, so that's irrelevant. But the 390th has a whole section that's on the home guard. They're closest to the English Channel of the 13th Combat Wing bases. And they have this whole wing that shows you how they protected themselves against, they were prepared for a land invasion. I mean, and only because people in that museum were interested in it. So it's really pretty cool. Everything is different. You'll get Sophie Green probably at Horham. She's excellent.
And that's great. I mean, there were 40 some of these air bases, airfields in East Anglia. Yeah. And in some sense, they're all alike. but in another sense, they all have distinct history. So,
Yeah, yeah, and there's some great books. I have them all sitting up on my shelf. Airfields of the 8th. A lot of them were RAF bases, or they started as RAF bases, and then the RAF simply signed them over to the Army Air Corps. Some reverted back, like Mildenhall, which is the 100th Air Refueling Wing of today. That was a British base in World War II that then reverted post-war to the Americans. So they've some have sort of come and gone both directions. So yeah, and it's really fascinating.
and
then the whole fighter bases, but they're a little west. The bomber bases are all in East Anglia.
Okay. And we'll be trying to make our way to one fighter base.
Yes, I think that's awesome. Is that Ed Cottrell's base?
Yes.
Is there anything left of it?
Don't know. Historically, I don't know.
The fighter group is still active. We're not sure about the base.
You should be able to find out. I would inquire about that. Bodisham is one that has a museum, all volunteer run. That's a fighter group. I'm trying to remember which one. Yeah, so you'd think they'd know ahead of time what you're going to find when you get there.
I'm in contact with now, just in the last week, the publicity guy, the officer who's in charge of base publicity. And we're talking about, what we're going to arrange, which we haven't settled on yet. But I'll ask him what historical, history there is still there.
Yeah, so most of the bases are wiped clean. There's nothing left. But if Ed wants to go there, because regardless, but ask where Bodisham is compared to where his base is. It's Bottisham, because Bodisham has a museum, and it's a fighter group. And I've been there when they were just starting out, I don't know, like 10 or 15 years ago.
Okay, great. Made note. Thank you.
So, I mean, it may be worth even just a half hour for Ed.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd have to, but you could find out.
See, the thing about Ed though, Ed actually was only ever in England. Is Ed on the call, by the way? We're kind of talking about him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ed was only ever in England for a few days.
Oh, really? Oh, that's right.
He was with the 9th Air Force, the Tactical Air Force, and all of his missions were flown out of continental Europe, first in Belgium and then in other parts of France.
That's right. I remember listening to it.
Yeah. So he didn't have a fighter base in England.
And that may not be worth it. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, if he was with the 9th. Yep. Yeah. Different.
Carol Popchalk?
Yeah, Todd, I just wanted to let you know, I sent you a picture from the 95th Museum. My friends just returned from there. There was a big reunion there last week. And you remember me telling you all the story of the Lucky Bastards table?
Yes.
Glenn shows. Well, it was David's dad. David is the guy in the mustache in that picture. Yes, that's my friend's husband. And that's the bar
is the bar.
Yep. The 95th. They sent me pictures of them dancing. They had a 1940s dance band.
Yes.
There. It was a fantastic event. And of course, they sent me pictures from the museum too, because there is a display case that has David's father's things in it. They donated his jacket and other, memorabilia from his time in the 95th. David's dad flew 35 missions and ended up at the Lucky Bastards table, thank God. But yeah, I forget which actor. Is this the one that played Rosie Rosenthal, or
no? That is definitely it's
David Mann, I think. I forget who played.
No, Nate Mann played Rosie, and that is not Nate Mann.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't.
Pretty good imposter, but it's not him.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And that Horam does that every year in the spring. I've never gone to it. They do it their hangar dance. Yes. And by all reports, we've tried to coordinate a couple of times with them, and it just didn't work. But no, Carol, you're exactly right. Everybody It's a really big deal, but they only do it once a year, and they're just not open consistently otherwise.
And that night, that Monday night, we'll be staying overnight in Ipswich. And I just want to show this map to give give you a sense of where we'll be heading. So we will be spending 2 nights in Cambridge and then going on to Ipswich. And I will note, this goes back in history, but this was a hotbed of Puritanism in the 1600s. So a lot of the Puritans who lived here moved in the Great Migration in 1630 to New England. So you see a lot of New England names. I mean, if you go to Massachusetts today, you can visit Cambridge, Braintree, Framingham, Ipswich, Harwich, all these places. They all kind of renamed for places in East Anglia.
That's true.
Where'd Glenn go? Did Glenn just abandon his post?
Yes, he did.
Wow. Was that in the military, you're not allowed to do that, are you?
I deserted my post.
Between innings.
The alternative was not attractive. So are we should we move on to the last active day?
Yes, please. Let's move on.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to both of these because I've been to London a couple of times, but somehow or another never saw either one. St. Paul's Cathedral, right? I think everybody would know what that is. And right in the city of London, the city being the old part of London that was within the Roman walls. A lot to see there relative to World War II. You know, it's famous in that it survived. The Germans tried to bomb it, hard to hit it. A couple of famous books about the people, the volunteers who stood on the roof of St. Paul's, and actually as the incendiary bomblets sort of thing would fall on the roof, they'd pick them up and throw them off.
Yeah.
And saved the church several times from being firebombed. Yeah. So there's just a huge amount of history there. And, you know, that goes back, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years. It's not just World War II, obviously. Rebuilt. You know, St. Paul's Cathedral was burned down in the Great Fire of London in 1666, rebuilt by Christopher Wren, whose other church, one of his many other churches, I can't remember dozens of churches that he built or designed after the Great Fire, is St. Clement Danes Church, an Anglican church, which is over in Westminster, which is outside of the city proper, more towards where the government buildings are. Big Ben, think Big Ben, Westminster Abbey. And the key here is this is where at least relative to World War II, it's where the books of remembrance to all those who died in the service of the Royal Air Force are kept. A lot of RAF artifacts. It was built in 1682, and Todd remembers it when it first went up, I think, right? No, that's me. That's old.
They weren't Puritans. I know that.
And then
are you going to the part of St. Paul's where you have the American Memorial Chapel? That's the whole remembrance for all the Americans. The 20.
I'm sure we are. It's not listed specifically on the itinerary, but I can't imagine that we wouldn't do that.
Yep.
Yeah. And then the final part of the day, be a pretty active day. St. Paul's, St. Clement Danes is a visit to the Churchill War Rooms, which I've been to twice, and it's amazing. I don't know how many on our call have others been to the Churchill War Rooms? I'm sure Pat. Yeah, I'm sure Nancy has. Yeah.
Yep, it's amazing. Have you been there since I had the last time I went? They had just opened that museum that's attached to it.
No, when I was there, last time I was there, it was about to open. It was before the pandemic. I haven't been there since the pandemic.
Yep, and I was there just before.
That I missed it. I literally missed it by a week or two.
It is really, really good. I've been there before and after. I mean, the Churchill war rooms themselves, it's like, how the heck did they breathe? I mean, like all the cigarette smoke and stuff underground. But the museum is excellent.
Yeah. Have others on the call been in the Churchill War Room? Speak up if you've been there.
I've not been there.
No. Okay. Yeah, I've been there twice. I think there were one or two of our travelers who have been there before too, and we actually talked about, well, if you've been there a couple of times, the third time, although I'll do anything Churchill as often as I can, there's other Churchill sites to see nearby. If a couple of us wanted to peel off and see something else, the Admiralty House is not too far from this. So that's our last day with activities planned. Day 8, also in London, is an open day for everybody to do what they choose to do.
And we'll have a farewell dinner that night.
Right.
So we'll meet back up for dinner on the night of Wednesday, September 18th.
Right. And I imagine, I don't know how this has sort of happened in the past, Todd, when there's an open day. I imagine people might group together and go together one place or another, depending on their interests.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody would say, you know, I want to go to Westminster Abbey. Who's in? A group will do that. Another group will do something else. Yeah.
Yeah. Although I know from experience with Westminster Abbey, I want to do it again, but I'm staying on a few days after as well.
Right.
You need to check their schedule very early as to when they're open, because they close all sorts of different days for occasions, a funeral or a wedding or other things.
Right.
But yeah, there's no lack of things to see. There's no doubt about that.
Hey, Glenn, Todd.
Hey, Joe.
Hey.
Joe.
So I'm looking at the flight back, the one on Thursday. It looks like 5 o'clock London time.
Yeah.
So it says you probably want us there about 2.5 to 3 hours before the flight.
Yeah.
I think. I'm just putting it together right now. So let's say you got to be at the airport by 2 or 2:30 at the very latest London time. So it says that also on Thursday we'll have some time, to do whatever the heck we want to do.
Yes.
Okay.
There'll definitely be time Thursday morning. I was thinking the same thing. Yeah, we have a late departure,
Yep.
so we don't have to get up and go
I mean,
to
really
the
what
airport.
that says, it's nice. What it says is that, especially, I've been to London a number of times, but my wife has not, and it'll be fun. I mean, what it says is we can kick around on Wednesday and then also spend some time on Thursday to go see some things.
Right.
Got it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Pub crawl Thursday morning, Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually have been watching on YouTube a show about famous old pubs in London. How far back can you go? And I have a list of 2 or 3 I want to go to. Not so much because I want to imbibe that much, but they're just, some of them are 400 years old.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and when you're in Cambridge, the guy Allen before mentioned it. It's probably going to be crazy because of the air show, but if you're in Cambridge, at least go poke your head into the Eagle Pub. Speaking of pubs, have any of you been to the Eagle Pub? If not in Cambridge, if not, look it up online. It is airmen from RAF and 8th Air Force and 9th Air Force probably. When they were there, signed their names on the ceiling. I mean, it's just
Oh, how neat.
And many of them then died. I've been there with vets who found their name on, where they put it there in 1943. I mean, it's just, it's really cool.
How great.
Really, really old pub called the Eagle Pub, kind of off the beaten path, but in the heart of Cambridge. I think I was with somebody who knew their way around because I remember following them, but it was well worth it. Even if you can't eat or drink there, stick your head in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for that tip. Stuff like that we would love to have, information like that to pass on. And remember, when we're there, with the whole trip, we're going to have an English tour guide
Right.
who'll be with us making recommendations just like that, and probably adding things on and, shifting the schedule around as we move, because he or she will be aware of what's open and what isn't, and what we might most want to see.
Right. And Alan, Churchill's archivist, who we just listened, he also recommended it. That's what I thought. Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Very good.
Okay.
Hey, Todd.
Yes.
If you're leaving later in the day on Thursday, I'm meeting a friend and his wife. He's a retired Air Force officer. And you might have a chance to meet him depending on where everybody is.
That'd be great.
He never signs in because it's in the middle of the night over there.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a tough time arranging programs with people who are in Europe.
Yeah.
And right now, I believe that we have 27 registered.
Ooh.
I think I said 30 earlier, 27 registered travelers. 2 more might be joining us. So that's where we stand right now.
It's a good size.
It's a nice size.
Anything under 40 is really manageable. Over 40.
We don't want 40. We definitely don't.
And the buses can't maneuver where you need to go.
Right.
That's your big hang up.
And we want room on the bus too. We don't want to be packed on the bus. And we want a good manageable group. I think the final payment for the trip is due June 13th, but everybody will be getting an alert about when that is coming up. Yeah. I think people could add on to the trip after June 13th, but I'll have to check with Laura Passuello, our travel planner, to confirm that. But it's a good group. It's a wonderful group. I'll be soon when the group more or less, solidifies. I'll be getting us all together and making sure that we all know who we are, and we'll have several more meetings before the actual trip itself.
I'm jealous.
I think, Todd,
I could go.
Todd, I think we're going to do maybe 2 or 3 programs on the history behind all of this, say the Battle of Britain history, things like that. Well,
right. Exactly.
Yeah. Nancy, I wish you were coming.
I know. I'm jealous. It'll be fun. If something changes, I'll try and try and join. I haven't been over since pre-COVID. So, but and if you're interested, I think I sent an email to you guys yesterday. You can connect with probably with somebody at Thorpe Abbott's if you want. And Sophie Green would, I think, pretty sure be your person at Horham. So, but yeah, it's that, and those are the groups featured in Masters of the Year, because they all three, the 390th, 95th, 100th, all flew together. Definitely, I say we all flew in the same sky, fought the same fighters, same flak. So. But it'd be great. Enjoy it.
Okay. Todd, are you ready to sign off?
I think we're ready. Oh, hey, we have Jerry. Jerry's going on the trip. Hello, Jerry. How are you?
Yeah. Hi, Todd. I just was on a Zoom with Scott Masters up in Canada.
Yes.
And that was great. We were interviewed by his classroom, history classroom. Oh, and I just got off of it. I just joined you. So
okay.
That was wonderful.
Our conversation that we've had for the past hour is archived on YouTube. Jerry, I'll send you the link to it so you can watch it and get caught up.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us and for discussing the trip, Glenn.
Thanks. Any what?
I was going to say, do you have any idea when you want to do the first kind of history lecture? Is that coming up in June or July, maybe?
I would say July.
Okay.
Right. If we're going to keep to our Thursday night programming, pretty much have guests book through June.
Okay.
Need to work on a couple, but I would say come July, we'll be doing the sort of history background to the trip.
Okay. Very good.
Hey, Todd, once we're done, could I call you right back and help me resolve this Zoom issue I have with my Zoom and the VBC Zoom being intertwined?
Okay. We will sort those two out. All right. Yeah, give me a call, Glenn, and we'll get that sorted out. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Stay cool.
Bye-bye.
I'm glad we joined it. That was good.